Well, hello. It's definitely been a while since I've been here, but what else better than to do on a rainy Friday afternoon, or at least where I live, than to read a chapter of The Islander by Cynthia Rylant. I have had this book for as long as I can remember, for years. It's a quick, as you can see, it's a quick little read. But yeah, let's just hop in. Part 1, The Mermaid. Chapter 1. I was a boy when I met the mermaid, and of course no one believed me. It didn't matter. I was a solitary boy, lonely actually, and had long given up on anyone understanding what I said or how I felt. I had lived with my grandfather for 3 years, and he was a kind and gentle man, but he could not see into a boy's world, and so could not do much more than love me. The mermaid must have known that she could trust me. She must have known I had only a grandfather who taught me to read and write, and then left me to my own education as he returned to the Adler wood he carved for a living. And read I did, every day and sometimes all night long, and I knew things that most boys didn't know, and was ignorant of things most boys are sure of. I knew why heroes sometimes fall and why wise men sometimes do terrible things, and where in one world one might actually get a glimpse of heaven, but I could not multiply by 7 and did not guess ever that stars had names. I lived on an island called, this is Canadian, probably French actually, Chile, off the coast of British Columbia. There was no electricity and visitors were rare. Perhaps 30 families lived on the entire island, and they mostly kept to themselves. Island people are exactly that, islands. Well, the larger world does not interest them, but it interested me. Oh, how it interested me. I longed for the simplest pleasures, to ride a horse, I had never seen one, to take a train, to drive on long open roads forever and never meet the water's edge. I wanted to know what I was missing, what was happening in the world without me. And I thought I might never know, until one evening, in the light of a full moon, someone spoke my name, and the whole wide world opened. Chapter 2. The mermaid was shy, like me. I had always been shy. My grandfather was forever reminding me to speak louder, hold my head up, shake hands with a strong, firm grip. Not that there were many opportunities to practice this. I saw other islanders rarely. I did not attend school with the children of Chile, for they had to be boated to the larger island, which each day, and grandfather would not allow me on the water without him. We went to church on occasional Sundays and met the docking on the mainland ferry on Thursdays, but most days I could get by with speaking softly and holding my head however I chose, which was usually low to the ground so I could find interesting things to put in my pocket. And it was this habit of bad posture that actually brought me to the mermaid. Living by the ocean, I hardly noticed it. The sea spread out blue and wide before me each day, but I didn't care. I wanted small things to take home, so the cliffs, the fields, the shore at low tide were what interested me. I collected rocks, glass, shells, bones, feathers. I loved finding coins, and of course, I always hoped for a letter in a bottle. What boy doesn't? A letter from a young girl in China, a princess perhaps, who needed someone's help. And I would write back to her, but instead of sending the bottle, which might be lost, I would give the letter to a wise gull, instructing it to find the girl in China and bring me back her reply. This way, I imagined, I might find a friend with my head full of dreams like these, and my eyes on the ground that one afternoon, I stumbled across something that made me gasp and stop and literally rub my eyes with wonder. And when I was certain I wasn't imagining the thing that lay before me, I stopped and picked it up. It was a mermaid's comb. I knew it was a mermaid's comb because, as I have said, mine was an unusual education. One of the many volumes in my grandfather's library was a book on sea lore, and in it, a chapter on sea people. I had read this chapter at least a dozen times for not being able to find a true friend on land. I had imagined finding one in the sea, but I really didn't expect such a thing to happen. I was a wisher, it is true, and my wishes were practical and involved things like bus tickets and horse ranches. I had not wished for a mermaid, but I knew when I saw the comb that day exactly what it was, for it was amazingly a living thing, like the starfish that clings to the rocks and the coral that sways in the seas. The comb was alive and so beautiful. It glinted green and blue and silver in the sun. The outer rim of it hard like a shell, but its teeth soft and alive, like the tentacles of a jellyfish, and in my hands it vibrated like the tuning fork on my grandfather's mantle. I had discovered a mermaid's comb. The possibilities of what might happen next made my head swim. There we go. So I sat down and breathed deeply as my eyes looked out across the vast blue water. The sea was finally interesting to me. I stared at it for a very, very long time. Chapter 3. I decided after what seemed many hours to wait there for the mermaid to come back. The sun had set and the tide was coming in. I knew the rocks where I'd found the comb would soon be covered with water. So I climbed farther up the bank and found a soft spot in the seagrasses to wait. I was concerned about my grandfather, who would be worrying. Why are these pages so hard to turn right now? Who would be worrying about me when I did not come home for supper. But how many chances does one have to find a mermaid? It was a beautiful night filled with stars and full moon. I sat in the grasses and thought of my parents, both dead, and wondered if they flew among the stars holding hands. In my mind, I called out to them and hoped they could see me from wherever they were. I wondered if they would recognize me now. The night was chilly, but living on the island, I learned to always keep a jacket around my waist for unexpected rains or sudden cold storms. So I pulled it on and was content. My hand slightly stroked the mermaid's comb, and its teeth tickled my fingers. The comb felt warm and oddly happy to me. Boys can sit quite still when they have to, and are always better able to hide themselves than grown people. Perhaps it is because I was so good at this that the mermaid came swimming towards the rocks, free of caution or fear. When I realized what was actually in the water heading my way, my heart pounded so that I was afraid for a moment I might die. It is one thing to read of mermaids or angels or fairy people. It is another to be all alone in witness of such. I felt cold and faint and sick. Then suddenly the comb in my hand began to move. Not just quiver, but in fact to move. As if it were trying to stand on end or rise up out of my hands and fly. And I became so involved in holding onto it that I did not see the mermaid swim past the rocks to the edge of the sand and somehow settle herself out of water near the grasses where I was hiding and holding desperately on to her comb. But then I heard a soft whistle, and looking up, I saw her not more than 20 feet away. I froze. The comb slipped from my fingers and floated through the air until she caught it and slid into her hair, and we sat in silence, each knowing the other was there. Then she spoke my name, Daniel. And her voice was so beautiful and familiar that all my fear left me, and I could not stop myself from answering, yes. And when I spoke, the mermaid slipped back down to the sea and was gone. I told you she was shy. My grandfather's... Hold on. Okay. Chapter 4. My grandfather's cottage was built by his grandfather from stones and boulders gathered from the shore. And the sense of time and the elements was everywhere in it. I could feel some nights the comforting presence of all who had lived there before, and this gave me the feeling of being part of a very large family. Water buckets 100 years old still stood by the back door, and a child named Anna had carved her name in a beam above my attic bed. I was sorry Anna was not still here, for I so longed to tell someone about the mermaid who would believe me. I felt Anna would. Grandfather was justly angry with me when finally I arrived at the cottage past midnight, the evening of the mermaid. He had been out with his lantern, calling, and fear was still in his eyes, though I was home safe. And I do not know whether it was because he was so upset and I pitied him, or whether I simply could not lie about the most important night of my life, but I told him the truth. I told him I had found a mermaid, and his fussing and scolding stopped. He looked at me long, and when he finally spoke, it was not with anger or judgment. He simply said softly, "It's all right, son." And because I was wise in certain ways, and I knew exactly what he was feeling, I knew that my grandfather believed I was not well, and my mind was not well, and that the loss of my parents and the loneliness of living with him had made me so. If I had told him I'd spent the evening with my foot stuck between two logs, or that I had been cornered by a bear, or that I'd fallen asleep in the seagrasses, he would have been relieved by my slippery story. He would have guessed that I was simply having too good of a time somewhere to want to come home, and that, like an ordinary boy, I was trying to fib my way out of trouble. But when I told him I'd seen a mermaid, and I couldn't bring myself to say something else, I believe he felt he'd truly lost me. I could see it by the hand across his forehead, his troubled eyes, and I wanted to take back what I told him. I wanted to wash away the mermaid story and come up with some other kind of story, something really clever and naughty and normal. But it was too late, and there was nothing for me to do but go to bed and pray that my grandfather still loved me, and that the mermaid would come back. Because I couldn't give her up altogether. Seeing her that evening made me believe in things I'd never believed in before. And for the first time I felt a part of the world, for the world was no longer little stone houses and wooden boats and the cry of gulls at dawn. It was larger and deeper and more marvelous than I'd ever known, and being absolutely sure of this made me want more than ever to be alive. Of course, I could not possibly sit in the grasses and wait late into the night ever again. Given the anguish I'd already caused my grandfather, I could not bring myself to disobey him, not even for the miracle of a mermaid. But I felt she would surely return to those rocks, so I borrowed an idea from an old dream of mine, and I put a letter in a bottle. This is what it said: "Dear mermaid, please find me, Daniel." I put the bottle on the same rock where I had discovered her comb, and I waited. Chapter 5. The bottle disappeared with the tide, and I found myself thinking of nothing else. In the days of waiting for an answer to my letter, I would catch myself repeating the whistle I had heard from the mermaid's lips, or moving my fingers over the teeth of an imaginary comb. At night, my dreams were full of salt water and searching, and I would wake up suddenly and think of her. And finally, on the 9th day, something happened. I'd gone to the rocks each morning, each evening, hoping to see the mermaid again, or to hear from her somehow. I had little hope she would come to the rocks before dark, so instead I looked far out on the water for any sign she might be there. In 8 days, I'd seen nothing. But on the 9th day, as the sun lay down on the horizon, and the water glistened orange and gold, watching on the rocks where I waited, a sea otter suddenly bobbed up almost beside me. Otters were a common sight near the island shore. I saw them often, so at first I was just disappointed that the creature in the water was not the mermaid, then disinterested that it was an otter. But something extraordinary happened. The otter was swimming with a shell in its paws, as otters often do, when suddenly it gave 3 short barks and 1 long one. The rhythm was so startling that I turned toward the sound. And as I looked more closely at the otter, I noticed that on his forehead a very unusual marking, a large white diamond. Then, as I leaned more curiously forward, the otter tossed its shell to me and disappeared into the waves, holding that shell in my hands. I knew, of course, that again the marvelous was happening, and again I felt that cold fear when one is faced with something mysterious and unknown. Both happiness and dread ran through me. I used my pocket knife to pry open the shell, and inside I found a key. It was small, ornate, and very old. Its brass had tarnished to black. I had no idea what it meant nor what to do with it, but I knew I was absolutely certain that the mermaid had sent it, and I was so moved that I nearly wept. I could not remember every feeling so important. That evening, with the candle beside my bed, I wrote another letter. This one read, "Dear Mermaid, the key is beautiful. What does it open? I miss you, Daniel." I left the bottle for her very early the next morning, as the tide was still pulling from the shores, and I believed that somehow I would hear from her again. And the story of that is even more marvelous than what I have just told. And with that, that is the conclusion of part 1 of The Islander. If you want to hear part 2 of this story, then tune in next week to listen to it. With that, remember to subscribe, like, and comment.